I've spent 12 hours a day alone in a tower, watching for smoke. People always ask me if I ever got lonely. The truth is, loneliness was never the problem. The problem was the cabin that wasn't supposed to exist. When I was 28, I took a seasonal job with the Forestry Service in northern Montana. The work sounded perfect. I had just gotten out of a long relationship. I wanted to disappear for a while, and sitting on top of a mountain sounded a lot better than living in another noisy apartment. The lookout tower sat nearly 7,000 feet above sea level. The nearest town was almost 45 minutes away. There was no cell service, no internet, just a radio connected to dispatch and an emergency satellite phone that hopefully I'd never need. Every Monday, a supply truck climbed the mountain with food, water, and fuel. The rest of the week, I was completely alone, or at least, I thought I was. The first month passed quietly. Every morning I'd make coffee, climb the tower stairs, scan the forests through binoculars, record weather conditions, and wait. Sometimes I'd spot elk, occasionally black bears. Mostly, nothing. The silence was almost therapeutic. Until one afternoon, I was hiking one of the old fire access trails about half a mile from the tower when I noticed something strange. Fresh footprints. Not animal tracks, human. Large boots. The strange part wasn't that someone had walked there. The strange part was the direction. The tracks weren't coming from the main trail. They came from deeper in the forest, where there weren't supposed to be any trails at all. I assumed another ranger had been exploring. Still, something about it bothered me. The boots were unusually large, and every step was perfectly spaced. Almost unnaturally consistent. I followed them for nearly 10 minutes. Eventually, they disappeared into thick pine needles. I shrugged it off and returned to the tower. That night, around 2:30 in the morning, something knocked on my door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. Nobody should have been up there. Not at that hour. I grabbed my flashlight and looked through the window beside the door. Nothing. The porch was empty. I opened the door anyway. Cold mountain air rushed inside. The forest stood perfectly still. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. I convinced myself it had been a branch hitting the wall, even though there weren't any trees close enough to reach the tower. The next morning, I mentioned it over the radio. Dispatch laughed. Probably a curious deer? I laughed too. Even though deer don't knock. A week later, I found another set of footprints. This time, they circled the tower. Whoever made them had walked around it 6 or 7 times. Every footprint faced the building, as if someone had spent several minutes just staring up at me. There were no tracks leading away, only toward the tower. I searched the area for almost an hour. Nothing. No campsite, no vehicle, no person. Dispatch sent another ranger that afternoon. He inspected everything, couldn't explain it. Before leaving, he smiled and said, "You're spending too much time alone." Maybe he was right. Isolation does strange things to people. I tried forgetting about it. For another week, nothing happened. Then I found the cabin. It wasn't on any map. I know, because I checked. Twice. It sat tucked between enormous pine trees about a mile east of the lookout. Old logs, collapsed chimney, broken windows. It looked abandoned for decades. Yet, the front door hung slightly open. Inside, everything was coated in dust. A rusted stove, a wooden rocking chair, an old lantern, nothing unusual. Until I noticed the table. Someone had placed a coffee mug in the center. No dust, perfectly clean, as if it had been set there that morning. I walked closer. The mug was still warm. I dropped it immediately. Coffee spilled across the floor. Fresh coffee. Someone had been there. Very recently. I rushed outside expecting to see someone watching me. Nothing. Only trees, wind, silence. I practically jogged back to the tower. That evening, I asked dispatch if anyone knew about an abandoned cabin east of my station. Silence. Then, no structures are registered in your sector. I explained exactly where it was. Another pause. Finally, the dispatcher replied, "Stay at the tower. We'll send someone tomorrow." The ranger arrived just after noon. I took him directly there, except the cabin was gone. Not burned down, not demolished, gone. There was only forest. No clearing, no foundation, nothing. The ranger stared at me. "You sure you're feeling all right?" I argued with him for nearly 5 minutes. I knew exactly where we'd walked. I'd even marked the path with orange survey tape. The tape was still tied around the trees. But the cabin had vanished. After he left, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe I'd imagined everything. Maybe the isolation really was affecting me. Then, that night, the radio crackled. A voice whispered through the static. "Hello?" I grabbed the microphone. "This is Black Ridge Lookout. Go ahead." Silence. Then, "Don't leave tonight." The transmission ended. Dispatch hadn't called me. Their logs showed no outgoing radio traffic. I barely slept. Around midnight, the knocking returned. 3 slow knocks, exactly like before. This time, they came from underneath the tower, not the door, from below me, as if someone was knocking on the support beams. I turned off every light, looked through the floor hatch. A man stood directly beneath the tower. He wasn't moving. He wasn't looking around. He was staring straight up at me, even from 40 feet away. I could tell something was wrong. His face was completely expressionless. His clothes looked decades old, like something from the 1970s. I pointed my flashlight down. The instant the beam touched him, he stepped backward into the darkness. Not turned, not walked, stepped backward, without ever taking his eyes off me. Then he disappeared into the trees. I called dispatch immediately. 2 rangers arrived just before sunrise. We searched the entire mountain. No footprints, no campsites, nothing. Before leaving, one of the older rangers pulled me aside, quietly. "So, you saw him too?" I asked what he meant. He looked toward the forest before answering. "There used to be another lookout here." He disappeared. 43 years ago. They never found him. I asked if people still searched for him. The ranger shook his head. "No. They stopped searching after they found his journal." "What did it say?" He hesitated and then spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "It said there was a cabin in the woods. A cabin that only appears when someone is about to take his place." He refused to say another word. My contract ended 2 weeks later. I packed everything before sunrise. As I drove down the mountain, I looked into my rearview mirror one last time. Standing beside the road was the same man, perfectly still, watching my truck disappear around the bend. I never went back. A year later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched public records for the missing lookout. Eventually, I found a newspaper clipping from 1981. There was a photograph attached. The missing ranger stood beside the lookout tower, smiling at the camera. Behind him, barely visible among the trees, was an old log cabin. The exact cabin everyone insisted had never existed. I enlarged the photo on my computer. That's when I noticed something I wish I never had. Standing in the cabin doorway, watching the photographer, was another man wearing modern hiking clothes. He looked almost exactly my age. The article was printed 45 years before I ever worked on Black Ridge. I've never been able to explain that photograph, and every summer, when wildfire season begins, I wonder if someone else is sitting alone in that tower, waiting for the cabin to appear.